All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're completely bypassing the dry plot summaries to get right to the good stuff. We're going to explore the absolutely revolutionary and honestly surprisingly relatable ideas packed into Marcel Proust's massive 4,000-page masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time. We're talking about a work that isn't just some dusty old story. It's a profound, deep dive into human consciousness, how our memory actually works, and the very nature of time itself.
So before we even really begin, I want you to think about your own life for a second. Have you ever, caught a whiff of a specific varnish on an old wooden staircase? Or maybe tasted a childhood treat and suddenly, bam, you're instantly teleported decades into the past? That sudden, overwhelming rush where a totally forgotten world just resurrects in your mind? Well, that exact phenomenon is what Proust literally spent his entire life trying to decode.
Section 1. The Taste of Memory, Unlocking the Past.
Okay, so we got to start with what's probably the single most famous pastry in all of literature, the Madeleine cake. It's just this simple little shell-shaped sponge cake, right? But in the novel, when the narrator dips this cake into a cup of warm linden tea and it touches his palate, he experiences this extraordinary shudder. This exquisite pleasure just completely invades his senses, and it brings on an overwhelming rush of pure joy and these insanely vivid memories of his childhood back in the town of Cambrai.
Now here is a really fun fact about the reality behind that magic. This intensely elevated literary symbol actually started out in Proust's early drafts as just a plain old piece of morning toast mixed with honey. And then later, it was written as a hard biscotto. I love that because it brilliantly grounds his towering intellect in everyday reality. It basically proves that your memory trigger doesn't need to be some fancy French pastry, it literally just needs to be deeply wired into your own sensory history. And all of this perfectly illustrates Proust's core psychological division. On one side, we have voluntary memory. This is your intellect. So when you actively try to remember, say, what you ate for lunch last Tuesday, Proust argues that your intellect preserves absolutely nothing of the past itself. It just feels dead, lifeless, and flat. But then, on the other side, we have involuntary memory. This is the stuff triggered by sudden sensory experiences, like a random taste or smell. And Proust believed this is what creates our ultimate reality. It literally resurrects the past in your consciousness, completely intact with all of its original emotion. It's actually amazing because modern neuroscience, especially theories around somatic markers, echoes exactly what Proust was writing about over a century ago.
Moving on to Section 2. Time as a fourth dimension.
So the really crucial point here is how involuntary memory reshapes how we understand time. Proust didn't look at time as this straight, relentless line just constantly eroding our lives. Instead, drawing a lot of inspiration from Celtic myth, he viewed past events as being literally hidden inside everyday material objects. They're just sitting there, dormant, waiting until they're triggered by a completely chance sensory encounter. And when that happens, time is regained in the present. You aren't just remembering the past. You are quite literally experiencing it simultaneously with your present reality.
He describes this beautifully, using the image of a medieval cathedral in Cambrai. He calls it a building which occupied 4 dimensions of space, the name of the fourth being time. Just think about that for a second. He saw this old church as actually navigating its way through the centuries, much in the same way our own personal histories are preserved in this multidimensional mental reality. Basically, we are all walking, breathing vessels of time.
All right, Section 3. The Theater of High Society. Now, let's zoom out a bit from the inner workings of the mind and look at the outer world of Belle Époque France. Because Proust wasn't just a solitary philosopher of memory, he was an incredibly sharp, often hilarious satirical observer of social class. During the French Third Republic, the social tectonic plates were really shifting. You had the old nobility of the Faubourg Saint-Germain on one side. They were relying completely on ancient titles, super rigid etiquette, and old prestige. And then, clashing right up against them, you had the rising bourgeoisie, these wealthy financiers and industrialists who had all this new money and massive cultural authority. This clash created a deeply anxious society that was completely obsessed with rank, seating plans at dinner, and the very fragile illusion of prestige.
Proust just flawlessly skews the snobbery. He shows how social appearances are intentionally designed to mask these hidden and sometimes scandalous private lives. Everyday language and little gestures essentially serve as exclusionary rituals just to keep the wrong people out. Friendships, they aren't based on genuine connection at all. They're built on utility and blatant social climbing. It's just a constant, cruel negotiation to keep the class order intact. Basically, Proust is showing us that high society is just a giant theater of masking, where everyone is constantly performing fake identities to climb a ladder that, honestly, leads nowhere.
Section 4. Love, Jealousy, and Illusion.
Now, this idea of performative masking completely spills over into his incredibly sharp and sometimes really painful observations about romance. He writes, "All man's suffering is caused by his desires." That is a heavy quote, but an absolutely crucial one. Whether we're looking at the character Swann's deeply tragic love for Odette or the narrator's own intense obsession with Albertine, Proust absolutely does not view love as a fairy tale. Not at all. He sees it as a painful illusion driven by anxiety and this impossible desire to possess someone else. We don't actually fall in love with the real person. We fall in love with our own made-up mental image of them.
He completely exposes the futility of trying to possess another human being. In the volume called The Prisoner, the narrator basically tries to guarantee his own happiness by entirely controlling his lover's proximity to him. Normal domestic routines, like visits, carriage drives, listening to music, they all become these suffocating instruments of possession and deep anxiety. We try to control the other person, thinking it'll cure our jealousy, but the irony is it only multiplies our uncertainty. Confinement just becomes this dark laboratory for studying the very unstable boundary between what we actually know for sure and our own wild illusions.
Which brings us to Section 5, Salvation through Art.
Okay, so time erodes our lives. Society is totally shallow, and love often fails miserably. Sounds pretty bleak, right? But hold on, because Proust actually offers us one profound, totally transcendent way out. His definition of art is absolutely fascinating. He describes a work of art as an optical instrument. It's an instrument provided by the creator to help the reader or the observer discern things inside themselves that they would otherwise totally miss. So art isn't just pretty entertainment, it's a literal lens. It allows us to step completely outside our own rigid viewpoints and experience the universe multiplied through the varied eyes of others.
So whether it's a beautiful piece of music like the Sonata by real-life composer César Franck, which actually inspired the emotionally clarifying music of the fictional composer Vintiel in the novel, or a truly great book, art serves as our ultimate salvation. Why? Because it crystallizes all those fleeting, chaotic, confusing feelings into durable, permanent meaning. By taking our lived experience and turning it into art, we actually defeat the destructive power of time. We regain the time we thought was lost forever. So, as you finish up this explainer and go about your day, I really want you to look around and wonder, what totally ordinary object, what completely forgotten scent or taste is secretly holding your own personal history? What mundane trigger is sitting right there in front of you, just waiting for the perfect chance encounter to unlock your mind and recapture your own lost time?